Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Tuesday, May the 14th, 2024. Our reading this past Sunday was a rather lengthy one, at least the first reading, from 1 Corinthians 15. We're going to take some time looking at that. Can't even possibly, with that many verses, look at all of it, but we do have this week to break down some of the key points. I want to kind of build today and tomorrow on some themes from my sermon on Sunday. Of course, it just so happened also to be Mother's Day, and so I wanted to relate some touching stories of mothers that kind of connect with what Paul is talking about here, what our faith is all about. Again, 1 Corinthians 15, I want to look at verse 3, where Paul writes, "For I handed on to you as of first importance what I in turn had received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures." The idea that Christ died for us. The story is told that in 1878, William Gladstone, who at that time was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, presented himself before Parliament to announce the death of Queen Victoria's daughter, Princess Alice of Britain, the Grand Duchess of Hesse. And in making this announcement, Gladstone told the following touching story. It seems that the Duchess had 7 children, 6 of whom had come down with diphtheria during an epidemic. Her youngest child, Marie, had a painful death in spite of her mother's tender care. And subsequently, the Duchess concealed the sad news from her other children to protect them from the shock and more pain. Later, however, she had to reveal it to them, and in particular to her son Ernest, who had been very devoted to his little sister. Well, Ernest was overcome with grief and broke down in tears. And in an affectionate attempt to console him and comfort him, she clasped him in her arms and kissed him, ignoring the doctor's warning that she should not breathe on them or have them breathe on her. Well, it seems that Princess Alice, was very weak from the strain of the illness in her family and caring for the children. So she was weak from heavy work and severe strain, and unfortunately easily caught the infection. Within a week after kissing her son, the Duchess herself fell severely ill and breathed her last on the morning of December the 14th, 1878. As some have pointed out, what that mother did, even though she was a princess, was a picture of true love. She loved her child and was willing to sacrifice herself to comfort her child. And that mother, as it's been pointed out, that mother's love is an illustration of the awesome love that God has for us, and a picture of the kind of love that we are to have for others. We talked about love last week. Here in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul is talking about that Christ willingly died for us. We know from the good news, the message of the New Testament, that it was because of God's love for us that Christ came and died for us. A second story of a mother's love. A missionary by the name of Dick Hills tells the following story. He writes, "She was lying on the ground. In her arms she held a tiny baby girl. As I put a cooked sweet potato into her outstretched hand, I wondered if she would live until morning. Her strength was almost gone, but her tired eyes acknowledged my gift. That sweet potato could help so little, but it was all I had. Taking a bite, she chewed it carefully, and then placing her mouth over her baby's mouth, she forced the soft, warm food into the tiny throat. Although the mother was starving, she used the entire potato to keep her baby alive. Exhausted from her efforts, she dropped her head on the ground and closed her eyes. In a few minutes, the baby was asleep, but I learned later that during the night, the mother's heart had stopped, although her little girl lived." Love, he writes, is a costly thing. God, in his love for us and for a lost world, spared not his own son to tell the world of his love. Love, he writes, is costly, but we must also tell the world at any cost. Such love is costly. And finally, a story that comes from Calvin S. Stanley, who, the nearest I can tell, was an African-American preacher in the early part of the 20th century down in New Orleans, Louisiana, and wrote the following. He writes, I knew him as a brilliant young member of a noted family. He was studying one of the great universities. His physical development was well nigh perfect. Tall, broad-shouldered, brawny, graceful in bearing, quick in movement, he was soon well known as an athlete. On the field, he was invincible in contests, being lion-like in his against his opponents. But when the games were over, in the hours of study and social time, he was found to be unusually sympathetic, considerate, and kind. Especially in the company of women, he was always the true gentleman, a model of refinement and courtesy. In private, he never referred to them except in the purest terms. The word mother was most sacred to him, and whenever that word was used in his presence, he became silent. Sometimes he even shed tears. And so I inquired of him one day why he was so rough and tough in athletics and so gentle at other times, especially toward women. He said, I never liked to refer to this, but my father told me that when I was being born, my mother's case was most serious. The doctor said, I cannot save them both. You have to decide quickly which one it will be. My father stood speechless, I was told, not knowing what to say. But mother, who had overheard what the doctor said, I will die. Let my child live. And thus mother gave her life for me. That verse 3, where Paul writes what he's passed on to us of the first importance, was that Christ died for our sins. If you were moved at all by those three stories of a mother's love, how can we not put the story of what Christ has done for us in the same category, speak of it in the same breath, with the same feeling, the same awesome impact that it would have on our lives? Well, we're going to look at verse 4 tomorrow. Until then, take care. Hope you have a great day today. Bye-bye.